The company tower stood tall in the middle of the city, shining with glass windows that reflected the sun like a mirror. Inside, hundreds of employees worked daily, moving through polished hallways and modern offices that smelled of expensive furniture and fresh coffee. On the top floor sat the CEO, a man everyone knew, but not everyone respected. His name carried weight, but his personality often pushed people away. The CEO was known for his sharp suits, his loud voice, and the way he walked through the office as if the whole building belonged only to him. Every morning, he entered the lobby with a sense of pride, holding his head high, ignoring the greetings of workers unless they were managers or directors. To him, the lower staff were invisible, just part of the background that kept his empire running. Employees whispered stories about him. Some said he once fired a young man for being 5 minutes late, even though that employee had worked tirelessly for months. Others recalled how he mocked a receptionist for mispronouncing a word during a company event. In his world, mistakes were not forgiven, and humility had no place. Many admired his business skills, but few admired the man himself. The janitors, the security guards, and the cafeteria workers especially felt his coldness. He never looked at them directly, never thanked them, and sometimes even made jokes at their expense. For him, they were just people who didn't matter. Still, these workers did their jobs quietly, avoiding his path, knowing that one wrong word could get them fired. Despite his arrogance, the CEO was successful. He had built the company into one of the biggest in the industry. The offices sparkled. The profits soared, and the employees knew they were working for a powerful man. Yet behind the glass walls and clean desks, there was always an air of tension. People worked, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. On that particular week, the CEO had been more boastful than ever. He had just returned from a luxury vacation, showing off photos of his private jet, expensive watches, and his pride enjoy a sleek black luxury car that looked like it came straight out of a movie. Whenever he walked out to the parking lot, he made sure people noticed the car, often pausing to wipe the hood or brag about its engine. To him, the car wasn't just transportation, it was a symbol of his success, proof that he was above everyone else. But what he didn't know was that among the people who cleaned his offices late at night, there was a man who had once worked in a very different world. That janitor had knowledge and skills the CEO could not imagine. Yet for now, he pushed the mop quietly, listening, observing, and keeping his talents hidden. The building itself was a place of contrast. The executive floors were bright and modern, filled with glass walls, designer furniture, and art pieces worth thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, the lower levels where the janitors worked were plain and simple, filled with cleaning supplies, storage closets, and old equipment. It was almost like two different worlds existed in one building: the world of power and wealth upstairs, and the world of hard work and survival downstairs. Most employees kept their heads down, following the rules, working long hours, and trying to stay out of trouble. They knew the CEO's temper could spark at any moment. If he was pleased, he gave a nod of approval. If he was angry, he could crush a career in seconds. People feared his voice in meetings, feared his judgment, and feared being the next target of his public mockery. Still, the janitor, the man who seemed invisible, didn't complain. Every day, he wore his uniform, pushed his cleaning cart, and carried himself with quiet dignity. Many never noticed him, but those who did saw a kind man, always polite, never bitter, always finishing his work with care. He was like a shadow in the building, moving silently in the background, watching the prideful world of the CEO from a distance. No one could have guessed that this silent janitor would soon become the center of a story that would shake the entire office. No one could have predicted that a single moment, a single test of skill, would turn the arrogant CEO's world upside down. The setting was ready, the stage was prepared, and fate was about to bring the two men face to face in a way that no one would ever forget. It was a bright afternoon when the unexpected challenge appeared. The CEO had just finished a meeting with some investors and was in a particularly proud mood. His voice echoed across the lobby as he walked out, laughing loudly, surrounded by a few of his senior managers who nodded and smiled at every word. He carried himself like a king leaving his palace, and his black luxury car stood outside waiting like a royal carriage. The sleek machine always caught people's attention. Employees walking by often slowed their steps just to admire its shining paint and polished chrome. The CEO loved this attention. Every day when he walked out, he looked around to make sure people noticed. That car was his favorite way to show everyone how successful he was. But that day, something unusual happened. When the CEO pressed the remote key to start the engine, nothing happened. He frowned, pressed again, and still nothing. He pulled the door handle, slid into the leather seat, and tried to start it manually. The engine coughed, made a dull sound, and went silent. His proud smile slowly faded. A small crowd began to gather. Employees on their break peeked through the glass doors, whispering and chuckling quietly. "Isn't that his new car?" someone said. "Did it just break down?" The irony was too delicious for them to ignore. The CEO, who prided himself on being untouchable, was now stuck in front of everyone with a broken car. Red-faced, he stepped out of the car. He looked around at the employees, then laughed loudly, trying to mask his embarrassment. Well, he said, "looks like this car is giving me a little challenge. Nothing I can't handle, but maybe." He paused, eyes narrowing, scanning the crowd like a predator searching for prey. "You know what?" he shouted. "Let's make this fun. If anyone here thinks they can fix my car, do it. And if you succeed, the car is yours." His voice was dripping with sarcasm. He didn't actually believe anyone could repair it. To him, it was just a joke, another way to remind people that he was far above them. The employees laughed nervously. They knew this wasn't a real offer. The CEO loved to play these little games where he mocked others for entertainment. No one dared step forward. Some shook their heads, others looked at the floor. It wasn't worth the risk of failing in front of him. The CEO smirked, enjoying their silence. "That's what I thought," he said loudly. "Big talkers, small doers, none of you have the skill for this. You're good at sending emails, but when it comes to real work, useless." His words were sharp, meant to cut deep. Then, almost unnoticed, a figure at the back of the crowd moved slightly. It was the janitor. He had been standing quietly, mop and bucket by his side, watching the whole scene unfold. His uniform was plain, his shoes slightly worn, but his eyes carried something different, a calm confidence that no one else in that moment had. He didn't step forward right away. He knew what people thought of him, what the CEO thought of him, to the world inside that building. He was invisible. Just the man who cleaned the floors and emptied the trash bins. But inside him, memories stirred. Memories of long nights spent in a small garage back in his hometown, fixing cars for neighbors and friends. Memories of his father teaching him how to listen to the sound of an engine, how to feel the rhythm of a machine. The janitor's heart beat faster. He knew he could fix it, but he also knew the risk. If he failed, the CEO would humiliate him in front of everyone. Still, something inside told him this was his moment. The CEO, noticing the slight movement, turned his gaze toward the janitor and sneered, "What's this? Don't tell me you think you can fix my car." His words were laced with laughter, and some employees chuckled along, though uncomfortably. The janitor said nothing yet. He simply looked at the car, then back at the CEO. His silence spoke louder than words. The CEO raised his eyebrows, amused. "All right then," he said mockingly. "Go ahead. Show us what you've got. But remember, I said if you fix it, it's yours. Don't embarrass yourself." The crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers spread. "He's going to try. Is he crazy?" Some pitied him, some were curious, but most were certain he would fail. After all, how could a janitor succeed where the powerful CEO couldn't? But the janitor wasn't afraid. Deep inside, he knew something no one else did, that respect isn't earned by money, titles, or flashy cars. It's earned by actions. And soon, everyone would see. The stage was set. The arrogant CEO had thrown down his challenge, never imagining anyone would dare accept it. The janitor, the man most overlooked and underestimated, was about to step into the spotlight. And what? What happened next would not only surprise everyone watching, but it would change the balance of respect inside that building forever. The air outside the building grew heavy with tension. Employees stood in small clusters, pretending to check their phones or chat, but their eyes never left the scene. Everyone knew this wasn't just about a car anymore, it had turned into a show, and the CEO was the star performer. He looked at the janitor with that same sharp smile he used whenever he wanted to belittle someone. "So," he said loudly, making sure the entire crowd could hear, "our cleaning man thinks he can do what none of my executives can. Isn't that something?" He let out a laugh that wasn't just amusement, it was mockery, designed to cut deep. The crowd chuckled nervously. Some laughed only because they feared the CEO, not because they found it funny. Others stayed quiet, uncomfortable with the humiliation unfolding before them. The janitor stood still, his hands resting calmly at his sides. He didn't look angry. He didn't even flinch. He just stared at the car as if it were an old friend waiting to be understood. But the CEO wasn't done. "Tell me," he continued, pointing a finger at the janitor, "how many luxury cars have you fixed with that mop of yours? Do you plan to scrub the engine until it works?" His voice dripped with sarcasm, and a few people at the back laughed. Out loud, eager to stay in his favor, the janitor finally spoke, his voice steady and quiet. "Sometimes it doesn't take money or titles to solve a problem," he said. "Sometimes it just takes knowing how things work." His words were simple, but they carried weight. The CEO's eyes narrowed. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. "Big words from a man who sweeps floors," he sneered. "Do you even know what kind of engine this is? This isn't some rusty old car from the street corner. This is a machine worth more than your entire salary for 10 years. You wouldn't even know where to start." The janitor didn't argue. He didn't need to. His calm silence felt stronger than any insult. That made the CEO even more irritated. He turned back to the crowd, raising his hands dramatically like an actor on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold. Our janitor is about to show us all his secret talents. Let's give him a round of applause before he embarrasses himself." Weak claps spread through the group. Most employees didn't want to join in, but they clapped anyway, afraid of being noticed. The sound of forced applause only deepened the awkwardness in the air. The CEO leaned closer to the janitor, lowering his voice so only he could hear. "You're making a mistake," he whispered harshly. "If you fail, everyone here will remember you as a fool. Are you ready for that?" The janitor met his gaze without fear. "Respect isn't lost when you try," he said calmly. "It's lost when you laugh at others for doing their best." For the first time, the CEO was left speechless. The words were simple, yet they pierced through his arrogance like a pin through a balloon. But he quickly masked his discomfort. With another loud laugh, turning back to his audience. "Oh, he's full of wisdom too," he shouted. "Maybe after this, he'll start giving motivational speeches in the cafeteria." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some were beginning to feel sympathy for the janitor. His quiet dignity stood in sharp contrast to the CEO's cruel humor. They could see who truly looked small in that moment. And it wasn't the man in the janitor's uniform. Still, the CEO pressed on, determined to keep the upper hand. "Go on then," he said with a mocking bow, waving his hand toward the car. "The stage is yours, my friend. Let's see if your magic touch can do what all the experts couldn't." The janitor stepped forward slowly, his footsteps steady on the pavement. He didn't rush, didn't show nerves. To him, the car wasn't a stage pro-pit, was just a machine with a problem that needed solving. But as he reached the hood, the CEO's voice rang out again, sharp and cutting. "Wait," he said dramatically. "Before you start, let me make something clear. When I said the car would be yours if you fixed it, I meant it. But don't think for a second you'll succeed. And when you fail and you will still belong to this company as the man who couldn't even fix a car he bragged about." The words hit the crowd like a slap. Now gasps and murmurs spread. Everyone could feel the cruelty in his tone. But the janitor, still calm, placed his hand gently on the car as if to silence not just the engine, but also the noise of arrogance surrounding him. The CEO crossed his arms, smirking. He was convinced the janitor would fumble, maybe break something, and give him more reasons to humiliate him. In his mind, this was entertainment, another story to brag about in meetings. Another reminder of how far above everyone else he stood. But little did he know, that moment of mockery would become the turning point. The very man he ridiculed was about to change everything with one simple, effortless act. And when it happened, the laughter in the crowd would no longer be his to command. Asterisk. The air was heavy with silence as the crowd watched the janitor move closer to the CEO's broken luxury car. His steps were slow, deliberate, almost as though he was walking onto a stage where the whole company had gathered as the audience. Nobody expected him to succeed. Some didn't even believe he would dare touch the car. But there he was, the man in a plain uniform, taking steady strides toward the sleek machine that had embarrassed its proud owner only minutes earlier. The CEO leaned against a pillar, smirking, arms crossed, pretending to be relaxed, but deep inside, there was a strange flicker of unease he couldn't explain. He told himself it was impossible for this janitor to fix anything. Yet there was something in the man's calmness that unsettled him. The janitor stopped in front of the car. For a long moment, he didn't move. He just looked at it quietly, as though he was listening. The employees exchanged puzzled glances. Some whispered, "What's he doing?" just staring at it. But the older ones in the crowd noticed something different. This wasn't hesitation. It was focus. The janitor bent down, running his hand lightly across the hood, feeling the warmth of the engine. His eyes softened, as though he was meeting an old friend after many years. For him, this wasn't just a broken car. It was a language he had once spoken fluently, a craft he had mastered long before he ever wore the uniform of a janitor. Memories flashed in his mind. Long nights in a small garage, back in his hometown, his father standing beside him, teaching him how every sound a car made was like a word, every rattle a clue, every silence a cry for help. He remembered fixing cars for neighbors who couldn't afford mechanics, doing it not for money, but for respect and community. He had given up that life when circumstances forced him to move to the city, where opportunities were scarce and survival mattered more than dreams. That's how he ended up pushing a mop instead of a wrench. But at that moment, standing in front of the CEO's car, all those years of knowledge came rushing back. His fingers itched not for the broomstick, but for the tools he once held with confidence. The CEO's voice broke through his thoughts. "What's the matter? Did you forget how to turn a screwdriver? Or maybe you're just stalling because you realized you're in over your head." His laughter echoed again, pulling a few half-hearted chuckles from those too afraid to stay. Silent, the janitor didn't answer. Instead, he calmly asked, "Do you have the keys?" The question caught everyone off guard. The CEO blinked, then tossed the keys at him carelessly, as if throwing scraps to a beggar. The janitor caught them neatly, without flinching, and slid into the driver's seat. Inside, he inhaled deeply. The leather smelled of wealth, but the machine itself smelled of neglect. He turned the key once, listening closely. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then fell dead again. But that was enough for him. He didn't just hear failure, he heard the problem. His trained ear picked out the uneven rhythm, the slight delay. The struggling spark. He stepped out of the car and walked around to the hood. He reached out to lift it, but paused. His eyes flickered toward the crowd. Their faces were mixed with curiosity, doubt, and quiet hope. Then his gaze met the CEO's. That smirk was still there, but thinner now, as if it was struggling to hold itself together. With a quiet strength, the janitor lifted the hood. The gleaming engine revealed itself, complicated to some, intimidating to many, but not to him. To him, it was like looking at a puzzle he had solved 100 times before. His hands moved instinctively, gently checking wires, touching connectors, tightening a loose part here, adjusting another there. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't showing off. He was simply doing what he knew best. The CEO shouted from behind, "Careful, don't break anything. That engine costs more than your entire apartment." His voice was dripping with sarcasm, but the crack of nervousness in his tone was clear enough for those who listened closely. The janitor ignored him. His world had shrunk down to just him and the machine. He felt the rhythm of the car, the heartbeat of the engine. He adjusted one final connection, stepped back, and lowered the hood with quiet confidence. Then, without a word, he walked back to the driver's seat. The crowd leaned in, holding their breath. Even those who had doubted him were now strangely eager, almost rooting for him to succeed. Something about his calmness had shifted the energy. He turned the key. For a second, silence. Then a deep, powerful roar filled the air as the engine came alive, smooth and strong. The car purred like a beast awakened, its polished body trembling with energy. The sound was undeniable, undeniable proof of skill, undeniable proof of respect earned. Gasps echoed from the crowd. Some clapped instinctively, unable to hold back their excitement. Others just stared in disbelief. The CEO's face froze. The smirk completely wiped away. He stood stiffly, unable to process what had just happened. The janitor turned off the engine, stepped out of the car, and quietly placed the keys on the hood. He didn't boast, didn't smile, didn't even look proud. He simply said, "It's fixed." The simplicity of those words carried more power than any speech could. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to prove himself with arrogance. His actions had spoken louder than the CEO's mockery ever could. The crowd erupted into whispers and murmurs. The story was already spreading how the man everyone ignored. The man mocked for being just a janitor, had fixed in minutes what the proud CEO couldn't solve at all. And though the janitor remained humble, walking back to where his mop still stood, the balance of respect in that building had shifted forever. The roar of the engine still echoed in the parking lot, bouncing off the tall glass walls of the office building. People could hardly believe what they had just witnessed. The janitor, the man who pushed a mop in silence every day, had fixed the powerful luxury car in only a few minutes. It was like watching a magician turn a trick no one thought possible. The crowd was alive with whispers. "Did you see that?" one employee muttered, eyes wide. "He actually fixed it." Another shook their head, still in disbelief. "And? So Isley, I thought he was just guessing, but he knew exactly what to do." But while the employees' voices carried excitement and even admiration, the CEO's face told a very different story. His pride was cracking, his jaw clenched tight. He had spent years building an image of superiority, a man above everyone else. And now, in front of dozens of witnesses, his arrogance had been shattered by someone he thought was beneath him. He forced a laugh, though it came out strained and hollow. "Well, well," he said, his voice louder than it needed to be, as though he was trying to cover his embarrassment. "It looks like even a broken clock is right twice a day." He gestured toward the janitor with exaggerated sarcasm. "A lucky guess. That's all. Nothing more." Some employees exchanged uneasy looks. They could tell the CEO was scrambling, trying to take back control of the moment. But the truth was too obvious. The janitor had fixed the car when no one else could. The as ever, said nothing. He simply stood near his cleaning cart, hands folded in front of him, his face unreadable. His silence only made the CEO more uncomfortable. "You know," the CEO continued, pacing a little now, "modern engines can sometimes just start on their own after being fiddled with. That doesn't mean you actually knew what you were doing." His words were sharp, but his tone betrayed a trace of insecurity. A young employee, braver than most, spoke up timidly from the crowd. "But sir, it wasn't luck. He knew where to check." He went straight to the problem. The CEO's head snapped toward the employee, his eyes narrowing. The poor worker immediately fell silent, regretting ever speaking. The CEO forced another laugh. "Oh, please. Really think this man, who spends his days scrubbing floors, could understand? A machine like this. Do you know how much training, how much knowledge it takes to handle a car like mine? Do you know how expensive it is? This is not some junkyard vehicle." His words lashed out like whips, aimed not at the janitor, but at the employees daring to admire him. But admiration was already spreading like fire. For years, they had seen the CEO humiliate others, always putting himself above everyone else. Now, for the first time, they had seen someone stand tall against his arrogance, not with anger or shouting, but with skill, patience, and quiet strength. The janitor finally spoke, his voice calm, steady, and without a trace of pride. "It wasn't luck, it was knowledge. A machine is just a machine. If you listen closely, it tells you what it needs." The words landed heavily. The crowd nodded, murmuring in agreement. But the CEO's face darkened. He felt control slipping. Further away, he stepped closer to the janitor, lowering his voice so only a few nearby could hear. "Don't get carried away," he hissed. "You fixed a car, nothing more. Don't think for a second that makes you special." The janitor met his glare, unflinching. "Everyone is special in their own way," he replied softly. "You just have to look beyond titles to see it." Those nearby caught the words, and they spread quickly among the crowd. The employees felt a shift of truth they had always known, but never dared to say aloud. Respect doesn't come from money or position. It comes from actions, from character. The CEO pulled back, his fists tightening at his sides. His pride was bleeding, and he knew the story would spread like wildfire through the company. The thought of being remembered as the man who mocked his janitor and lost made his stomach twist. Still, he tried one last trick. "Fine," he said loudly, trying to sound amused. "You fixed it this time, but would you be able to fix it again tomorrow, or the next day, or when something truly complicated breaks down? A car like this requires experts, not amateurs. Don't fool yourself." But no one laughed this time. No one clapped. The silence around him was deafening. The employees had already made up their minds. They had seen something the CEO could no longer hide. His doubt, his insecurity, his fear of being outshined by the very man he had ridiculed. The janitor quietly picked up his mop, ready to return to his duties as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But in the eyes of everyone watching, he was no longer just the janitor. He was the man who had stood tall where others had bowed their heads, The CEO, for the first time in years, looked small. His laughter sounded weak. His words felt empty. Doubt had not only clouded his mind, but also shattered the illusion of power he had worked so hard to create. And though he tried to brush it off, deep inside, he knew the truth. This moment would haunt him. No amount of money, no expensive suit, no shining car could erase the image of the janitor fixing what he could not. The crowd began to disperse slowly, carrying the story with them. Each whisper, each retelling was another crack in the CEO's carefully built armor. And though he stood tall, pretending to be unfazed, his heart pounded with the bitter realization that respect could not be battened. It could not be forced. For the first time in his career, the CEO felt something he had never allowed himself to feel before: doubt. The murmurs had barely settled when the janitor walked back to the car. His movements were steady, without a hint of hesitation, like someone who already knew the outcome before beginning. The crowd followed him with their eyes, their anticipation growing heavier by the second. Some employees leaned forward, clutching their coffee cups tightly. Others whispered, betting quietly whether the car would truly work now that the janitor had claimed it could. The CEO stood stiffly, his arms crossed, forcing a grin that no longer reached his eyes. His laughter from earlier had disappeared into silence, and though he tried to look amused, beads of sweat had begun to form on his forehead. The janitor placed the keys gently into the ignition. The sound of the metal sliding in was sharp in the tense air, like the strike of a drum before a grand performance. He turned at once, and the engine gave a cough. Some employees gasped. Others chuckled nervously, expecting failure. But the janitor wasn't rushed. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, tilting his head slightly, listening. He wasn't just hearing noise, he was reading the machine, like a doctor listening to a heartbeat. To him, it was speaking a language only he could understand. With calm precision, he stepped back out of the car and opened the hood again. His hands moved like those of a pianist, touching parts of the engine with ease. Loosening one bolt, tightening another, making small adjustments no one else would have noticed. He didn't use any manuals, didn't ask for tools beyond the basics. It was instinct, tears of hidden experience flowing back through his fingertips. The CEO, desperate to regain control, raised his voice. Be careful with that. You'll make it worse. This isn't your old, rusty neighborhood car. This is German engineering. Delicate, powerful, too much for you to handle. But his words no longer carried weight. The employees weren't listening. To him, they were watching the janitor. His silence was louder than the CEO's noise. His confidence was stronger than the CEO's arrogance. After a few final touches, the janitor lowered the hood softly, almost respectfully. He wiped his hands on a cloth, then walked back to the driver's seat. The crowd leaned in again, holding their breath. The CEO tried to laugh, but the sound cracked, hollow, betraying the nervousness crawling inside him. The janitor turned the key once more. This time, the engine didn't cough. It roared. A smooth, powerful sound filled the air, deep and steady like a lion waking from slumber. The sleek black car trembled, alive again. Its purr so perfect that even those with no knowledge of cars could tell it wasn't just fixed. It was fixed flawlessly. The crowd erupted. Gasps turned into cheers, disbelief into applause. Some clapped loudly, others whistled, while a few shook their heads in stunned amazement. Unbelievable, someone muttered. He did it. He actually did it. Another whispered, and he made it look easy. The janitor didn't smile, didn't raise his arms in triumph. He simply turned off the engine, stepped out, and closed the door gently behind him. He placed the keys on the hood, as if returning something borrowed. Then, with the same quiet dignity he always carried, he said, "It's done. Those two words cut through the noise like thunder. They weren't loud, but they carried a weight that silenced even the most doubtful. The car wasn't just running, it was running better than before. The CEO froze. His face went pale, his mouth slightly open. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. The man he had mocked, the man he had dismissed as nothing, had done in minutes what he himself couldn't manage at all. His arrogance, his jokes, his showmanship, everything collapsed under the truth of that roaring engine. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. That was just luck, he muttered weakly, but even he didn't believe his own words. The crowd certainly didn't. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody clapped at his comment. The employees stood united in silence, their eyes fixed not on the CEO, but on the janitor. For years, the CEO had demanded respect through fear. But now, in a single, effortless act, the janitor had earned respect through skill, humility, and grace. The contrast was undeniable. The mighty had been humbled, and the humble had been revealed as mighty. The janitor picked up his mop again, ready to return to his work, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. To him, it was just another problem solved, just another task completed. But to the employees watching, it was far more. They had witnessed a lesson, one that would stay with them forever. Never underestimate someone because of their position, their uniform, or their silence. The whispers began again, spreading faster than wildfire. He fixed it like a pro. The CEO looked terrified. Did you see how calm he was? Each retelling grew, shaping a story that would echo through the building long after that day. And while the janitor remained as humble as ever, the CEO stood frozen, his world spinning. His car had been fixed. Yes, but something inside him had been broken. For a long moment after the engine roared to life and then fell silent again, the parking lot seemed frozen in time. Employees stood still, their eyes fixed on the janitor, who had returned to his mop as if nothing had happened. The air was heavy, thick with awe and disbelief. No one spoke. No one even moved. And then, slowly, all eyes shifted toward the CEO. He stood rooted in place. His arms still crossed, but his face was drained of color. The smirk that usually clung to his lips had vanished. His jaw was tight, his eyes wide with something nobody had ever seen in him before: shock. The man who once towered over every conversation, who silenced rooms with a single glance, was suddenly stripped of the power that had defined him for so long. He looked small, almost fragile, as if the ground beneath him had given way. The CEO opened his mouth, perhaps to speak, but no words came out. For the first time, he wasn't in control of the narrative. For years, he had thrived on mocking others, turning their mistakes into entertainment, using his sharp tongue like a whip. But now, the whip was gone. His words, his jokes, arrogance, all of it, seemed useless in the face of the truth standing before him. The janitor had fixed the car effortlessly, calmly, without drama, and in doing so, he had undone the CEO's pride. The employees watched closely. Many of them had suffered under the CEO's ridicule. They remembered the cutting remarks, the harsh scoldings, the way he reduced people to silence just to feed his ego. Now, seeing him stand mute and shaken, they felt something shift deep inside. It was as though justice had quietly walked into their midst. The CEO tried again to speak, his voice barely more than a whisper. That was nothing, he muttered, though even he knew how hollow the words sounded. His throat felt dry. He forced a laugh, but it cracked halfway thin and broken. The crowd didn't respond. No nervous chuckles, no polite applause, only silence. And silence, in that moment, was louder than any roar of laughter. His chest tightened. He glanced at his employees, hoping to find at least one pair of eyes still filled with admiration or fear. But all he saw was something else: respect. Respect, not for him, but for the janitor. The same janitor he had mocked countless times was now being looked at with awe, as though he were the real leader in that moment. It was unbearable. The CEO felt his skin burn under their gaze. For a man who thrived on being the center of attention, being seen as weak was worse than any physical wound. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms, trying to hold on to the illusion of power slipping through his fingers. Inside, a storm raged. How could this happen? How could a man with no degree, no title, no wealth, no power humiliate him so effortlessly? The CEO had built his life on the belief that status and success made him untouchable. But the janitor had exposed a truth he could not deny. True respect comes from actions, not arrogance. He looked at the car again, its engine purring softly as though mocking him. That machine had been his pride, his symbol of status. Now it stood as a witness to his humiliation, fixed not by an expert mechanic, not by a wealthy peer, but by the very man he had dismissed as nothing. A bitter taste filled his mouth. He wanted to shout, to order everyone back inside, to pretend this moment had never happened. But he knew it was too late. The story was already alive, carried in the whispers and glances of his employees. By the end of the day, it would be told across the building. By the end of the week, it would be legend. He glanced once more at the janitor, who was quietly wiping the floor where the crowd had stood, as if the entire event was already behind him. There was no pride in his face, no triumph, no smugness. Just calm, just dignity. That silence cut deeper than any insult could. The CEO's heart pounded. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar: fear. Not fear of losing money or clients, but fear of losing the one thing he had always controlled: respect. He wanted to say something, anything, to restore his image. But every word that came to mind sounded weak. If he belittled the janitor again, he would only look smaller. If he admitted defeat, he would be surrendering his pride. He was trapped, cornered by his own arrogance. The employees began to move, slowly dispersing. Their voices rose again, but this time in a different tone, softer, warmer, filled with admiration not for the CEO, but for the man in uniform who had shown them what true strength looked like. The CEO remained frozen. He could feel the walls of his empire cracking, not in profits or numbers, but in spirit. He had always demanded loyalty through fear. But in that moment, he realized loyalty built on fear was as fragile as glass it shatters at the first strike of truth, and the janitor had struck with effortless grace. The CEO finally turned, his back to the crowd, his steps heavy. He couldn't bear to face them any longer. Every step toward the building felt like walking through mud. His once confident stride reduced to something awkward, clumsy. Behind him, the sound of whispers grew louder. He didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. He had been mocked by fate itself. And though he tried to convince himself otherwise, deep down he knew he would never live this moment down. The shock of it, the humiliation of it, the undeniable truth of it would follow him for the rest of his life.